And now, marine weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook for Friday and Saturday. We start out with the sea ice. Ice is quite extensive now along the Arctic coast. Areas of open water that were here in the lower Chukchi Sea are really beginning to fill in. The ice growth has definitely increased with the colder temperatures here across the Chukchi Sea and along the west coast, and we expect ice development to continue. Winds have not been quite as strong as what they were over the past week, but still, if you can get a lighter stretch of winds, then this ice growth will really increase through the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, and then out across northern areas of the Bering. Now, along the southwest coast, we are seeing the ice really fill in through Norton Sound. It's really growing rapidly north of Nunavik Island and especially east of St. Lawrence Island. We're also seeing areas of ice becoming more widespread. Kuskokwim Bay, still unsettled. We have windy systems fronts coming through the southwest coastline, Bristol Bay, so not quite as extensive across areas of Bristol Bay. And we are seeing some normal ice development for this time of year in the upper portion of Cook Inlet. Looking at the weather map for this late Thursday night, early Friday morning. Here comes an area of low pressure that'll be coming onshore here in the lower Yukon Delta with this frontal system bringing gusty winds and another round of accumulating snow. Some light to moderate accumulating snow could produce a period of blizzard conditions along the southwest coast late tonight and into Friday morning. Another low, a couple of lows back here weakening. This was part of a series that have impacted the Gulf here during the past few days. And we'll have another weather system taking shape here for the weekend. So the one moves on shore up here in the lower Yukon Delta Friday. Secondary low just east of Kodiak Island with an included front. We expect some weather with this, but here comes the next low. That's going to be the more significant low, lifting out of the North Pacific, crossing the central eastern Aleutians early Saturday, and then be taking aim toward Kuskokwim Bay by Saturday afternoon. And this low will take a track northward on up again toward the lower Yukon Delta with this frontal system out ahead of it. Probably get some sort of secondary front development in this area, or a secondary low development here in the western Gulf, so this could potentially enhance some precipitation. There could be additional accumulating snow along areas of south central and then certainly along the Gulf Coast, some gale force winds associated with that front. So Friday, winds across the Panhandle in the far southeast will be out of the southeast to south, as high as 25 knots south end around Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Waves 5-7 feet there, waves 4 feet. The middle channels with southeasterly winds, south winds to 15 knots, 2-foot waves, Lynn Canal. Strongest winds Friday, outer coast near shore waters within 15 nautical miles will be Sitka southward. Could see south winds of 20 to 25 knots with waves as high as 14 to 16 feet. For Saturday, the inner channel winds will continue southeast to south, 10 to 15 knots. Waves generally 2 to 3 feet, the inner channels. The outer coast winds are going to be south to southeast, 20, increasing to easterly 30 to 40 knot gales there at Cape Suckling. Waves generally 6 to 8 feet. And then on Friday for the northwestern Gulf, winds will be southerly outside of Hinchinbrook entrance off the Kenai coast, 15 to 20 knots, waves 6-7 feet. Southeast winds 15 knots, 3-foot waves Prince William Sound. Middle upper Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 2 to 4 feet there off of Anchor Point. And then the entrance of Cook Inlet, 20 knot winds from the southeast. Those winds, though, on Saturday at the entrance of Cook Inlet and northeast of Kodiak Island will increase to 35 to 40 knot gales with 10 to 11 foot waves. We'll also see 40 knot gales outside of Hinchinbrook entrance with waves 11 to 12 feet, 35 knot gales within Prince William Sound with waves as high as 9 feet in that area where the water is more open. On Friday, Kodiak Island south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. We are going to have a frontal system working its way up through the southwest coast. And as we trail out on the North Pacific side, winds will be out of the northwest 20 knots, Sandpoint, False Pass, 4 to 6 foot waves. Look for southwest winds 25 knots into Bristol Bay with 4-foot waves. South winds possible there north of Cold Bay with 7-foot waves. For Saturday, another low is going to be crossing the eastern Aleutians on up into the southeast corner of the Bering, and the frontal system ahead of that, we're going to see winds south to easterly around Kodiak Island at 25 to 30 knots. And then generally in the 25 to near 30 knot range here on the North Pacific, on the Bering side. South winds into Bristol Bay, westerly there. Once you trail out along the Alaska Peninsula, waves as high as 10 to 16 feet there in the lower corner of the Bering. Along the North Pacific side of the peninsula, 20 to 25 knots southwest to westerly with waves 13 to 17 feet. The Aleutians, look at generally southwesterly winds across the length of the Aleutians. Eastern Aleutians, 25 to 30 knot winds, but once you get around Atka westward, you can see some 35 knot gales between there and Atka, and then they fall back off 25 to 30 knots west of Adak. Waves generally 10 to 16 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 to as high as 11 feet in that gap between Nikolsky and Atka. For Saturday, winds will turn westerly through the eastern. We're looking at generally westerly winds, southwesterly in here around Atka, 25 knots, 25 knots, as high as 30 knots there south of Unalaska. Waves generally running 12 to 15 feet on the North Pacific side and 10 to 15 feet on the Bering side. Highest waves eastern Aleutians. Southwest coast, 30 knot east to southeast winds Friday as this frontal system approaches and then moves in. With ice in place in Kuskokwim Bay, but where there's open water outside of some ice there in Bristol Bay, 3-foot waves. 35 knot southwest gales behind the front there in the vicinity of St. Paul, St. George with waves up to 14 feet. Brisk easterly flow across the ice there within Norton Sound. Easterly winds 25 knots that extend down along the coast there of the lower Yukon Delta. And then for Saturday, look for east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, Bristol, Kuskokwim Bays. Coming around northwesterly 20 knots, St. Paul, 11-foot waves. And then further north, winds will be northeasterly out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta to 20 knots, turning northwesterly through Shelikof Strait, and ice in place in those areas. And then finally, for the far north, starting from the North Bering Sea, look for easterly winds 25 to 30 knots, turning more northeasterly through the Bering Strait, waves 4 to 7 feet there on the north side of St. Lawrence. And then across the lower Chukchi Sea, a lot of ice is formed now along the northwest and Arctic coast. So ice in place. Winds do fall off, though, to 10 to 15 knots once you get north of Point Lay from Wainwright through Kaktovik. And for Saturday, generally along the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knot east to northeast winds, Kaktovik down through Wainwright. As we drop through the lower Chukchi Sea, winds could be as high as 30 knots from the northeast off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. Lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island with waves running 4 to 5 feet where there is open water.